All right, hello everyone. Thanks for joining this session of the CSI Secrets Store Community Call. It's June 10th, and just to let everyone know, this meeting falls under the Code of Conduct under the CNCF. So just please be respectful when you engage in your conversation, and you'll be okay. Looks like we got just a short agenda, so it looks like we can get through those, and then maybe what we'll do is we'll focus on any pressing items in the repo, and we can discuss any PRs that may need to be reviewed. I think I don't see anyone new, so I don't think there's any need to do any introductions to the community. With that, let's go ahead. Let's start off with the announcement. So thanks, Anish, for updating. So yeah, the AWS provider is now listed under the supported providers. So thanks to the team at AWS and getting that on. That's awesome achievement. And I don't know if there's any other ad hoc announcements anyone wants to chat about. If not, we'll go and run through the agenda here. Let's see, I'll be moderating. Nish, if you can back me up on notes.
Yeah, I'll write.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's jump into it. Dane, we got one from you. We're talking about getting all the KV pairs, value pairs from the endpoint. And so I'll go ahead and share out the link on the issue, and the floor is yours to discuss.
Yeah, so yeah, I was just scrolling through the issues and came across this issue here. The proposal is that that we should be able to specify a single path to get all secrets on that path, on that relative path, rather than having to list the object name should that secret be on the same path. So if we scroll down just a little bit, it kind of takes on the to the YAML file below.
There we go.
Yeah, just there. Like rather than having just the objects, we can declare where we want the objects from, and then just specify the one path and get all the secrets. And then Tommy, I saw that in the discussion below, you mentioned that like the parameters are specific to the providers, but the secret objects, which I think deals with syncing secrets to the with Kubernetes, is related to the CSI driver. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, if this feature was to be implemented, would each individual provider have to like implement that feature rather than just being able to handle this entire feature within the CSI driver?
So I think the part with the secret objects kind of raises something that would need to be done just like for the driver to support of kind of like wildcards on the syncing. I know on the provider side, like wildcards on like fetching secrets are sometimes asked, but that requires like different permissions, at least in the GCP API. And I think there's some complexity of like, hey, get all secrets in one project, or whatever folder in Vault or account in AWS. So I think those would be pretty provider specific, but that there's, I think, more room for the driver to know the kind of like more of the structure from that parameters, and like to at least kind of like know more of the expected file system output, and then mapping that to the like mapped secrets. I haven't done too much thinking on how it could be broken up, but I think there's kind of some stuff on both sides. My initial thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we get asked this about this even on the Azure provider. I think like the most common question is maybe define a regex and then just fetch everything that matches the regex from the external secret store. We don't have an API that supports something like that where we can actually list everything. So it would still translate to an individual get that we do today. It's just that we would have to do a list, and then if any object matches the regex, we have to get it. But this one, I think, was very specific to the secret object. So it would be a driver change, but I think we need to see how we can support this based on how different providers can do it and return the object. Because like one question that was always there for the secret objects is how do we define the key for the list, right? Like, so I think in this example, they said data from object list, but in terms of the key value pairs, if they want to define a different key value pair, how does it work? And those different scenarios, because the whole section that we read from the mount, all that is provider specific. Like that is not something that the driver understands at all. The driver just reads from the mount and gets the data from there. So I think like understanding the mapping on how it's defined for the providers, how it could affect the driver is very critical for this part.
Okay. Could you say that part again with the secret objects? You're saying that it's getting that information directly from the mount?
Right. So today, if you see the secret objects, basically we have the key and the object name, right? Like that is what is the user tells us that saying this is a Kubernetes secret. So in that, the key is basically what the key is going to be in the data field of the Kubernetes secret. And then the value is what we get from the object name. So from the object name, we basically go to the target path, and then we read that file from the target path for that particular object name. And then like providers support object name, alias, and all those. But the object name field that the user defines is basically a file that has to exist in the target path.
Okay. And
I think here they said the object list, right? So this object list is going to be within the provider's parameters section. Like that is something that the driver does not understand today.
I see. So yeah, even, I mean, the way that this gentleman presented it looks nice, but if I'm understanding correctly, just the secret objects has no understanding of like parameters. Parameters are entirely provider specific.
Right.
Okay. Okay, I see. And then you said that each secret within like a secret store has to be received by an individual get. There's no like batch get.
I think that depends on how the external secret store APIs are implemented. At least for Azure Key Vault, I know we have a list API where we can get what secrets exist today, but we can't actually get the contents with it. So after we do a list, if the user defines a regex, then we basically have to match the secrets from those lists and then do a selective get for the ones that match. So from the user perspective, they just tell us that anything that matches this particular regex, get it for me on my behalf. And then as the provider would basically have to do a list, filter, and then do a get for each one of them.
I see. Okay.
But in terms of configuration, it reduces the complexity for the user.
Right. But it seems like in general, implementing it is a little more involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think when this feature request was asked in the provider, I mean, it was something that was still feasible without a lot of changes. But I think the same request for secret objects on the driver side, it requires a little bit more on how we can design this because the driver is totally agnostic to provider fields.
I see. Okay. That's all good to know.
Yeah. So I think like a scoped down thing could be like if the provider supported wildcards or filtering or regexes and whatnot, then expanding the secret objects part of the secret provider class to have some more automated way of like, because the secret objects maps what like files to the keys and values. So there could be just a small project on making that mapping support regexes or something like that. But kind of the whole feature, I think, is split. And then like, I think there would be a lot of benefits if we could have the secret provider class more aware of more of the structure of the expected, like the expected secrets and the expected mapping of secrets to files. But like, I just don't think we're there yet in terms of knowing whether or not there is like an abstraction that works with all of the various APIs, and whether that abstraction is more helpful or hurtful. But yeah, I would be interested in more proposals, kind of like, so that the driver can know more information. I think that would help us with some other requests of like templating files or maybe some rotation stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you think that it would be best to try to resolve the communication between like the different properties there in the secret provider class first? Or you also said like this functionality would be split. Would it be like possible to just start with like the secret objects and trying to configure a way to reference an object list first and then move on to the specific parameters of the providers? Or would you feel like this entire feature has to collectively work all together, if that makes sense?
I think it is easier to scope something that like will be successfully implemented just looking at the secret objects and ways to like conveniences kind of around declaring the secret objects. I think that's a smaller scope, more feasible project, where the other one is more ill-defined. Like, I think it adding more structure or provider knowledge to the parameters, or driver knowledge to the parameters, I think is a much more ambiguous task. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, I was feeling that it would feel more feasible to narrow something down. So I'm in agreement there.
Oh, and then I think also it could be like immediately useful. I don't know if any of the providers have implemented like wildcards, like, but like if they did, then this would complement that. Yeah, without requiring the parameters to be fully known.
All right, so looks like there could be a need to kind of expose more of the driver parameters up to the provider. Is that the consensus, or?
I think the consensus is that the secret objects mapping of wildcards may be a feasible, useful project. Yeah, I think.
Okay.
And then my one thought on that is in terms of like versioning, I think post 1.0 is where I would kind of put that in terms of the roadmap. Like, I'd like to, I think, prioritize getting the 1.0 out currently more than new features right now. Just I think we get a lot kind of questions about like the support and stuff. So
Right.
Does supporting this impact the design such that you know we may want to consider it before 1.0?
I think if it's scoped to just secret objects, it's not. If it's changing the kind of like parameters thing, but I think that might be big enough to where we would want to take a lot more time and have that be like a 2.0 kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the way I see it, it adds a new field in the CRD spec. Like one way, the way it is proposed, it could be that way. But again, it's not a mandatory field, right? It's totally optional. So if the user wants to use the same secret provider class post 1.0 with this change, that would still work. But if they want to make it easier, then they could just use this new field and maybe just say get it from a list. So from configuration perspective, it's a little different, but in terms of functionality, it's not going to be a breaking change, but rather it's just an optional thing that they can opt into by using a different field in the secret provider class.
Right. Can we also maybe see a detailed design of this proposal at some point, preferably before 1.0, so we can make sure it doesn't impact, you know, the design of the project?
Yeah, I think that I agree with that.
Also, I had a question. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just following up on your statement, Rita. So would that be like this without tag? Do we want to reach back out to Dirty Cajun Rice to submit that, or is that just something internally we would create?
So I think Dane was interested. So Dane designed this one. So would it be possible, Dane, if you want to look at this one, we can help you out with it. If you have any questions.
Yeah, I was kind of drawn to it because I think it would be a nice feature. It would make just configuring a lot easier. But I would for sure need to spend a good amount of time getting a better understanding of some of the working parts in the driver that are already there, and you know, experiment a little to see if I can come up with something. Just check in and ask questions when they come up.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I mean, as you try it out, let us know if you have any questions. And then I think a good action item after this, like what Rita said, right? Like, I think if you have a design proposal, then it'll be easier for folks to chime in and then comment on it. And then we can decide that if you want to make this blocking for 1.0.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, like I have this, like one question I will want to ask is like, how does validation for the object work with this? Since, you know, the list can change over time. So how we determine failure when we can't find an object is interesting. Like when the list changes, right? And how that impacts the decision for, do we say the mount is successful or not successful, right? Does that make sense? Or?
So when you say list, are you referring to the secret objects list, or if the user uses regex on the provider parameters?
Yeah, like maybe like the UX is still TBD, right? But the idea is that it could be a wildcard or whatever, right? It's the idea is it's a list with some objects defined, right? That list could change over time. So when the provider goes out there and try to grab these objects, how does it know that one object was say removed versus it doesn't exist anymore.
Got it. Yeah.
Right. And that information, once we get that back in the driver, how does the driver deal with that information? Is my question. Because right now, today, we just assume like the list is in the YAML, right? It's pretty clear when we see like, oh, object A should be there, but it's not. Okay, so that means that something's wrong, right?
Right.
But now that this list can be updated outside of the knowledge of the driver or the provider, right? How do you determine that? Do you have any thoughts on this, Dane?
Well, you got me thinking, for sure. If I'm understanding correctly with like the current behavior, the validation is from the fact that the YAML file specifically like names like the objects, right? Like it has those to go off of.
Right. So the idea is like that these objects today, it's a static list in the YAML itself, right? Whereas with this proposal, the list of objects that we're trying to sync or whatever, that is changed out of band, outside of the provider or the driver, right?
Right.
So how do we validate, you know, when an object is, say, removed from the list?
I see I think I'm understanding what you're asking.
I think it's a great feature. This is just like one question I have, because it could change the default behavior and the expectation from the consumer, like the application, right?
Yeah, and you don't have to solve that now.
Yeah, just something to think about.
To think about as you create that proposal. You know, we can get some feedback on it. Okay, I think we had a really good conversation about this. I don't know if there's any other comments. If not, we can move on. But I think so. Next steps, I guess, Dane, you'll look at kind of creating a design proposal.
Yes.
Around this, and then I guess we can all start to chime in on it.
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, all right. Let's see what we got next. Is Anish going to talk about the v.0.23 release?
Yes. So we're planning for the release today. And then the last release was about 22, 23 days before. So basically we are going to hop on the release cadence that we proposed. So that is aligning our release process with the patch Tuesdays. So the patch Tuesday was this week, and then we're going to cut a release for the driver this week with all the changes that have gone in. And then basically two things that I wanted to call out. The first one is we are disabling sync secret by default, which is a breaking change. So we'll be adding this to the release notes. So users who are using this for syncing as Kubernetes secret, when they upgrade their driver version or when they install it, they have to explicitly set sync secret.enable to true. Otherwise, it will fail going with this release. And then the second thing is when I was testing yesterday, one thing I realized was the sync secret had the RBAC permissions which were required for rotation as well. So like get, list, and watch. So if you're using node publish secret reference, then these permissions are required. So we basically added another RBAC role and role binding file specifically for rotation. And this is also disabled by default. If the user does enable secret rotation to true, then these permissions get installed. So basically we have broken down some of the permissions that's required. The default permissions that's required on secret provider class and pod status will be installed by default because that's required for mount. But the rotation RBAC roles and the sync secret RBAC roles have been separated, and only if the user wants to use those features, then they'll explicitly get added. So it's basically secure out of the box. But yeah, if there are no other concerns, we are going to cut a release today.
So when we say they will get added, like, do users have to manually install it? Because I think today we installed all the RBACs manually, right? As an install process.
So if they install the driver using YAMLs, then it's each individual file. But if they're installing it with Helm, it's basically just the knobs that they have to set to true.
Okay.
So prior to this, if they did enable secret rotation to true, it would just set the feature flag. The RBAC roles were installed by default, but now we put it in a conditional. So only if they set it to true, this RBAC role will get added, otherwise it won't.
Okay, cool. And if they want to enable it later, let's say I installed it with disable false by default with this release, and then I want to turn it on. How will be the experience?
So if you're doing it with Helm, you will just do an Helm upgrade, right? And at that point, you basically say enable secret rotation to true, and then Helm will add the template as part of your deployment.
Got it.
All right. And then we have one more here. So the syncing is Kubernetes secrets without the mount.
Yeah, I added that to see what other maintainers and everyone thinks about this. Like, this is a widely requested feature. Like, I saw they have like 15 thumbs up on this. So the general idea is the request is to split the sync Kubernetes secret from the mount, so that users only want to use sync as Kubernetes secret without the mount. And there's been a lot of good discussion on it. Like, the idea is they never use the mounted file, so they don't want to actually do the mount. And then they also want a way to trigger creating the Kubernetes secret without relying on the driver being called by kubelet. So I just wanted to bring this up and then see if anyone had any thoughts around it on should we support it. Because if we do plan to support it, it's going away from the primary functionality of the project. Like, it's no longer rightly called CSI driver because we are not relying on that behavior. So.
One thing that might be trivial to do is using the mount, but then and not writing it to disk, right? So like, we can use the mount definition for the CSI driver to call the providers, right? The CSI driver gets the responses back, and the driver could choose to just not write the files. So if the concern is I want to sync to secrets, but I actually don't want or need it to be, in the file system of the mount that's created, like, that could kind of be done. But then that doesn't, I think, solve the case of like, I want to sync to a secret, but I don't want a job created. Like, you don't want to create like an empty job just for secrets. And there, I think it might be better to work with the external secrets, which is already the controller, like, purpose built for syncing secrets between the external stores. Like, this might be where we want to engage with them and do more of like reusing the CRD, but or like a common CRD kind of thing that both projects understand. But that, I think my preference would be to remain more focused on this project just being the CSI driver.
I have a proposal. How about we bring this issue as a topic to the next SIGAUTH call? I do want to get more opinions on this, especially given how this is pretty sensitive, and also I think there's a lot of opinionated people in SIGAUTH who may have more to say here. But yeah, I think maybe we should go into that meeting with like some pros and cons of this, right? Like one thing I can think of is just confusion. If, you know, should this be two different projects? Should it be just two different functionalities within the same project, right? Like what kind of impact it could have on the user who's consuming it. Exactly to your point, like they could, you know, use the external secret project as well, right? So what's the difference essentially? And what are the ramifications of syncing secrets, right? So do we think we want to do that, or is it, or do we have other thoughts on the next steps?
Yeah, I think adding it to SIGAUTH agenda would be a good first step, like just to see what SIGAUTH thinks about this, supporting this in general. But yeah, I mean, within the same project, having the two functionalities, I think fundamentally it can be confusing, but also in terms of the deployment model, it's very different, right? Like if we decide to support only sync as Kubernetes secret, we don't really need to have a daemon set running on every single node, which is just a lot of overhead for the user. So I think that brings about confusion on how to install it. And then like even in terms of debugging, it can make it very difficult for us in just one single project. So like the tempting thing is to have two different projects, like if we really have to support it. But again, the CSI driver was created with the idea that mount is more secure than actually syncing as Kubernetes secret. So I think if we bring it up to SIGAUTH, and then if we see what feedback we get from there, and if they propose that having that is not something that we want to do, then we can just tell users that this is the model that we want to go with, and if they want to use it, then they can try external secrets.
One other thing worth pointing out is that it would give a very different permissions model. Currently, we rely on pod identity to kind of fragment permission to fetch certain secrets between a set of identities, and this would kind of necessarily require one service account having the keys to the kingdom, so to speak.
Yeah, like one of the reasons, like when we at Google were looking at different ways of doing this, and kind of hopped onto the CSI project, was the ability to use the workload identity directly. Yeah, so kind of seconding some of that.
Cool. And
When is that next SIGAUTH call?
in 2 weeks.
Couple of
Actually, it's nice that we have 2 weeks, and the reason for that is I think we should go in with like a doc that outlines the pros and cons of this approach versus completely syncing everything, because I think we get a lot of questions on this anyway, so that out of that talks, hopefully it will be good documentation that we can put up here for here's why we don't think you should be syncing secrets, and if you really want to, here's how to do it. But also it would hopefully help drive the conversation as far as like, since people want to sync their secrets, what's the right way to do it, and could that result in another project, right?
Yeah, I've added that in the notes, and then I can get started on a doc, and then I'll share that with the other maintainers and everyone on the channel so that we review it before we go into the SIGOP call.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of the agenda. We got some time here. We can look at, is there any pressing issues or PRs we should look at and or review?
No, I think in terms of PRs, it's the ones that are active, basically the release management doc. That'll be great if we can get more eyes on it. Me and Tommy have looked at it and added some comments on it. But the initial implementation of token request, we moved it to the next milestone because the PR still needs few more changes. And then it's also I think a longer effort. This one basically adds the plumbing for passing the service account tokens to the to the providers. But also on top of that, we have to handle rotation scenarios, like how can rotation pass this token to the provider? So I've opened an issue for us to basically do the investigation. And I think based on discussion, we want to make that blocking for 1.0. We want to decide if we want to use the native requires republish feature in the CSI driver for rotation going forward. I think that reduces the overhead. Like it'll also reduce the memory consumption because all the overhead falls on kubelet to give us everything. And we already have the idempotent way to call providers today, so that'll just work. But yeah, I think me, Tommy, and Ilek, we met the last week and we basically put some dates on the milestones. So we have added a v0.1.0 milestone. And then we've also put a date on the stable milestone that we think is possible. It could go a little bit further if some of the features have to take time for implementation. But this is the current set of dates that we have. And now that the 023 milestone is going to be complete, I think we will probably meet tomorrow or on Monday for just going over the 1.0 milestone and then basically having assignees for all the issues that are there so that we are tracking them actively to make sure that nothing falls out of the milestone.
Yeah, the only remaining issue in the 23 was the providers supporting the gRPC responses. And it looks like all of them have now had a release except for the AWS one being new hasn't implemented that yet. So I think we're probably good to try to do the release on schedule or as close to schedule and about that.
Okay. Thanks for the update. All right. That takes us to the end. Is there any other comments or discussions we want to have?
Also, we added a doc for the membership, like also general section on how to become a reviewer or a maintainer. So we added that doc, and then we also merged the PR to add Tommy as approver. So Tommy is officially an approver for the driver repo now. Yay.
Awesome.
Congrats.
Is that under contributing?
Yeah, so if you scroll down on the README, a little bit down. Okay.
Okay. I thought it was in the main
So getting
group.
involved. So yeah, so it basically shows how you can get involved, and then we have a reference to the membership criteria for our project as well.
Okay. Okay. So we call that memberships. Got it.
One of us. One of us.
Awesome. Okay. I think that's it. Lots of good stuff happening. So summing up, Dan, you'll kind of start on a draft of that proposal. And then it looks like we're going to go to the SIGOF meeting and discuss that issue, I think it was 298.
Yeah, that's right.
And yep, Okay, great. Okay, so that's it for this meeting. Next meeting is in 2 weeks. That'll fall on June 24th. So again, if you got anything, agenda items, please go ahead and fill that out. Hey, one quick thing, Anish, where are we at with the issue Oleg had brought? Do we have any traction on that?
So I think they are looking at the timeline. So the team is going to decide how they want to contribute, I think. But yeah, I think like
Okay.
if there's any communication, it'll probably be on the GitHub issue that they have open.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll take a look at it. Okay. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone for showing up. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, Thursday, June 24th. Have a good rest of your day.